Hey, it's Matt, your average gamer, and for this video, we're going to be going over 9 more fun and cool builds, including a whole bunch of build requests from you guys that have requested in the past like 8 to 10 videos or so. I went through the comments and added in some builds. This is going to be a really great one. Let's start with Stormcaller. And for this, we are using the Flamberge, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. A couple people asked me for a build for this one. I decided to do 2 builds for this weapon. This build and the next build will be using the Flamberge, again, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Really fun weapon to use. Great for Stormcaller because it scales with Dex, and we get an awesome A in Dexterity scaling. We got around 7,000 damage for the first use of the Ash of War there. You could also combine it with Bloodflame Blade, and if you're making contact with the weapon, you can build up bleed decently too while getting a lot of physical damage. That's what Stormcaller does. Ultimately, not a bad Ash of War, and one I haven't really built around much. Pretty fun to use too. Let's jump into equipment. And for equipment, we have the Keen Flamberge, plus 25 with Stormcaller. Any seal for buffs, we have the Rakshasa set on and White Mass, Millicent's Prosthesis, Ritual Swords Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Lord of Blood's Exaltation. Then we have the Green Burst Crystal tier, Faith tier. Let's jump into stats. And for stats on this one, we have 60 Vigor, 22 Mind, 28 Endurance, 15 Strength, 75 Dexterity, of course, because we're getting an A in Dexterity scaling, 25 Faith with the Faith tier. We have over 51 Poise, and we're using Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Bloodflame Blade. And for the other Flamberge build, we're going to do a Sword Dance build. By the way, if you haven't checked out my Dexterity crafting video, my new one, it should have been posted about 2 days before this one. Be sure to check that out. I will leave that in the description as well. It's an awesome video. That video highlights Sword Dance too and how to build around it, and it gives you a ton of information on Dexterity building, how Dexterity works, and pretty much everything you need to know in terms of Dexterity. Now, Sword Dance on this is also quite good. A little bit slower because it's a heavier weapon, but again, that A in Dexterity scaling, the innate bleed plus Bloodflame Blade, there's a lot going on here to give us a lot of damage. All right, in a second here, we're going to go over equipment, stats, everything you need to know for this build. And be sure to check out the Flamberge. It's a base game weapon. It's pretty amazing, honestly. It's definitely worth checking out for sure. Let's jump into equipment and stats now. And for equipment, we have the Keen Flamberge, plus 25 with Sword Dance, any seal for buffs, Rakshasa set, and White Mass. We have Millicent's Prosthesis, Wing Sword Insignia, or Rotten Wing Sword Insignia if you have it, it's better. Shard of Alexander, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Thorny tier, Faith tier, and we were using Moog Shackle to stun the boss. Let's jump into stats now. And for stats, we have the same stats in the first 2 builds, 60 Vigor, 22 Mind, 28 Endurance, 15 Strength, 75 Dexterity to take advantage of that A. Scaling we get 25 Faith with the Faith tier, hit over 51 Poise again, Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Bloodflame Blade as our buffs. And the next one up here we have is Godfrey's Vortex, a build I made up using both Devonia's Hammer as well as Godfrey's Axe. It's a combination build since they have a combination moveset and works on strength mainly with a little bit of faith. And of course, we're able to use the Ash of War to a good extent because we're using the Godfrey icon and Shard of Alexander with this build. We'll go over equipment in a little bit. And then you get to use a bunch of jump attacks, of course, and you can get some good poise damage out of that with a combination moveset. And a lot of physical damage is the main focus behind this build, going for big bonk damage with these 2 awesome weapons. This is definitely one of those hard-hitting builds that's a lot of fun to use. I had a really good time testing and messing around with this one. Sometimes it's really difficult to combine 2 entirely different weapons like these 2, but you can make them work together and honestly have a great time in the process. Second here, we're going to go over equipment, stats, everything you need to know. And of course, we have Devonia's Hammer, plus 10 preferably. We have Godfrey's Axe, Axe of Godfrey, plus 10 preferably. We're using the Erdtree Seal, part of the Rakshasa set, and the Grey Bird Armor for jump attacks. Axe Talisman, Claw Talisman. We have the Shard of Alexander, Godfrey icon, and then we have the Green Burst Crystal tier, Faith tier. Let's talk about stats. And for stats on this one, we have 60 Vigor, 16 Mind, 40 Endurance, a lot of Endurance for this build. We have 50 Strength. If you 2-hand either weapon, that'll go up to 75. 40 Faith with the Faith tier, 15 Dexterity, and for our buffs, we're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. And next up, we have a Fire and Frost Straight Sword build. Fire and Frost Straight Swords are pretty fun to use together. Straight Sword is kind of an awkward class because while they're kind of quick, they're not extremely quick like daggers or anything, and they don't have a ton of AR either, so it puts them in a little bit of an awkward spot. But if you run them with Fire and Frost, you could end up with a build that ends up being a lot of fun and pretty good too. And of course, the fire will reset the frost proc, so you can get a couple different chunks of damage throughout major fights. And with this boss in particular, because it doesn't have a ton of HP, she doesn't have a ton of HP, it's only going to end up being one proc in total. But if you're taking on larger bosses with a lot of HP, expect a couple of procs and then resetting it, taking around 5 to 10% of their HP with each frost proc. Pretty awesome and a good way to run straight swords. Second here, we're going to go over equipment, stats, everything you need to know for this build. And it's a cool build to look at too, ultimately. If you check it out here, we got the fire and frost vibes going on. It's definitely cool to look at. We have 2 Lord Swords, straight swords. We have one with Flame Spear, one with Chilling Mist, Cold Affinity, and Flame Art Affinity. Any seal for buffs, Rakshasa set. Shard of Alexander, Godfrey icon. We have Millicent's Prosthesis, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia if you have it, or Wing Sword Insignia, Thorny Tier, Flame Tier. Let's jump into stats. And for stats on this one, it's a little bit of a mixed build. We have 60 Vigor, 20 Mind, 25 Endurance, 15 Strength, 45 Dexterity, 20 Intelligence, and 40 Faith. A lot going on stats-wise to kind of give us a decent amount of AR, and we're using Golden Vow and House Shabiri. And next up here, we have a build for Morgott's Cursed Sword, and this is a really fun one to use again. A couple people asked me for an updated build on this one. I'm not a huge fan of this weapon overall, but again, the Ash of War is probably one of the coolest to look at in the entire game. It does a little bit of bleed, and it does a lot of fire damage, which is a cool combination, and it scales with Dexterity and Arcane. Doesn't have insanely high bleed or anything like that, so it's not going to get you a ton of bleed procs, but it will get you a proc here and there, and decent fire damage on the Ash of War. Once again, using this, it's pretty awesome to look at, and it can do decent damage too. Second here, we're going to go over equipment, stats, everything you need to know. And for equipment, we have Morgott's Cursed Sword plus 10 preferably. We have any seal for buffs, White Mask, part of the Rakshasa set on. We have the Shard of Alexander, Ritual Swords Talisman if you want to boost the fire damage. But if you want to focus more on bleed, Lord of Blood's Exaltation would probably be better. We have the Fire Scorpion Charm, Millicent's Prosthesis for more dex, and then we have Flame Tier, Faith Tier, and of course we're using Morgott's Shackle there to stun the mini-boss. So the stats are from another build, so I'm going to go over what you should look at here. You should probably be in the 55 to 60 Vigor range, around 18 Mind, 28 Endurance would be good. You only need 14 Strength, so you can put a couple more points back into Mind as well. 45 Dexterity, 45 Arcane, 25 Faith with the Faith tier, Golden Vow, and Flame Grip Strength. And next up, we have a build for the Zweihander. I think this is going to be the other one I used that stat spread on because I was doing a Roar build and then I didn't change my stats. Cool thing about Roars, by the way, we're using Braggart's Roar with the Zweihander here, if that's how you say it. And you can get it bleed proc pretty much on every hit, especially early on, because you get 3 times the amount of bleed on Roars because it multiplies the status effects on Colossal Weapons by 3, which is pretty awesome, giving us an amazing build for this Colossal Weapon that only weighs around 15 or so that's a big plus too. It's a really cool weapon. Let's jump into equipment. And we have the Blood Zweihander, plus 25 preferably with Braggart's Roar. We're using the Highland Axe for the passive, any seal for buffs, White Mask Rakshasa set. We have the Two-Handed Sword Talisman, Axe Talisman, Roar Medallion, of course, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Spike Crack tier, Faith tier, and we're using Sleeping Pots for that boss, which is really helpful if you run into any of the Godskin bosses. Let's talk about stats. And we have the same stats as the last build, 55 Vigor, 13 Mind, 33 Endurance, 19 Strength, 40 Dexterity, 45 Arcane, 25 Faith with the Faith tier. This is a dex-leaning weapon with a little bit of strength, and we're using Golden Vow and Flame Grip Strength. Another requested one is the Pada, if that's how you say it, and I put it in Blood Affinity. I ended up making a build for this with Endure that honestly does a lot of successive attack damage and can build up bleed quickly while giving you a decent amount of defense because we could take advantage of the fact that we have a relatively light weapon too. So we have the White Mask on and the Solitude set for some decent defense and a decent amount of poise. And then, of course, I missed it there, but you use Endure and then build up stackable damage, get some bleed procs in, and have fun with this weapon. It's not an amazing weapon or anything for PvE, but ultimately you can make it work. You can make a lot of weapons work in Elden Ring. One of the things I love about it is the variety that we have. And here, Endure works really well, gives you the ability to tank some hits, get in some attacks, and build up on them. Speaking of random things, I'm going to ask you guys, what is your favorite obscure weapon or non-meta weapon? What weapon do you like that a lot of people call maybe not good and you use it all the time, or it's something that you're really trying to make work? Maybe I can make a build for it in the future. Be sure to comment below. I'm curious as to your thoughts. Let's jump into equipment and stats for this build. And we have the Blood Pada, if that's how you say it, plus 25 preferably with Endure, any seal for buffs, White Mask, Solitude set, Melissa's Prosthesis, Wing Sword Insignia, or Rotten Wing Sword Insignia if you have it, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Arsenal Charm plus 1, or Great Jar's Arsenal if you have that, Thorny tier, Faith tier. Let's talk about stats. And for this one, we have 60 Vigor, 15 Mind, 30 Endurance, 15 Strength, 45 Dexterity, and 45 Arcane for that Arcane Blood soft cap. 25 Faith, that will be when we use the Faith tier, so that we can use our buffs once again, Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. And the next one up here is a Great Club Holy build. Somebody asked me for a Great Club build. This is a pretty awesome weapon. It goes best in Sacred or Flame Art Affinity. It actually gives this weapon like between 850 and 900 AR. Combining these two together with Sacred Blade gives us a ton of jump attack damage and a pretty cool and good Ash of War as well. The big focus here, if you're using these though, and you're going to take advantage of the extra holy damage from Sacred Blade, is using jump attacks because of the fact that these do a good amount of poise damage, have solid AR. That's the best bet. And then as a backup, you could use Sacred Blade if you need a ranged attack. Ultimately, a pretty amazing build, and one that could be probably really good for DLC too. A lot of bosses that are weak to holy in DLC. Let's jump into equipment. And we have two Sacred Curved Great Clubs with Sacred Blade. We have any seal for buffs. You could use the Erdtree seal if you want to throw in some incantations. We have the Gravebird Armor on for the jump attacks, Shard of Alexander, Claw Talisman. We have the Sacred Scorpion Charm, Ritual Swords Talisman. We have the Holy tier, Faith tier 2. Let's talk about stats. And then for stats on this one, we have 60 Vigor, 20 Mind, 35 Endurance. You're going to want a lot of Endurance because you're going to be mainly doing jump attacks. 24 Strength for the minimum requirement on each, 12 Dexterity, 70 Faith. I think we have a little bit of more Arcane with the mask that we have on. I just threw that on for fun. It fit the build. And then we have Golden Vow and Halaster Brewery as our buffs. And the next one up here we have is Bayle's Tyranny. Somebody asked me to do a build for this one. It's a really fun incantation. I did figure out that the Talisman of the Dread actually increases. It counts as magma. It's a cool one to use. Probably much better for bigger targets than this specific very tough mini boss. But yeah, this is really enjoyable to use. Definitely worth trying out. And I like Bayle's Flame Lightning too. You could throw that in as well. Yeah, using the two together is pretty cool. Bayle's Flame Lightning is a mix, I believe, of both lightning damage and fire damage. This is going to be pretty much all fire and magma damage for the most part. It does very little lightning damage from testing it. It's much more increased from the flame portion of it. And of course, being able to use the Talisman of Dread with it is a huge bonus. And if you had the Faith for, if you're at a higher level, you could probably run the Blasphemous Blade with this incantation and have a lot of fun with it. I ran it more as a bleed build though, because I'm really like I'm basically putting all my stats in Arcane with very minimal faith, using the Dragon Communion seal at that point. Another thing you could do is, I'm not sure, I think it counts as a Dragon Communion incantation, so you could use the Dragon form potentially to increase it further, but keep in mind that gives you very little defense when you use that. And of course, we're going to finish off this boss with Bayle's Flame Lightning. They combine well together. If you're able to do two runs and get both of them and combine them together, you can have a lot of fun with them. They're not super OP, but they can be pretty good. In a second here, we're going to go over equipment and stats for this build. And for equipment, we have the Colt Great Katana plus 25 with Seppuku. We have the Dragon Communion Seal. We have the White Mask and Rakshasa set on. We have the Phlox Canvas Talisman, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Talisman of the Dread, Melissa's Prosthesis, that's for our katana so we can get the minimum requirements, and for successive attacks, Flame tier, Faith tier. Let's talk about stats. And for stats on this one, we have 55 Vigor, 21 Mind, 26 Endurance, 20 Strength, 20 Dexterity, and then we have 33 Faith, that's with the Faith tier. We have 60 Arcane. Again, you're going to need a lot of Arcane to run this build. We have over 51 Poise, Golden Vow, Halaster Brewery, Bayle's Tyranny, and Bayle's Flame Lightning. Really cool to combo together. And thanks for watching this one. Thanks for tuning into my top 9 new fun builds to check out in Elden Ring. I hope you enjoy these. And for the people that requested them, I hope you're able to catch this video, and I hope I made good builds for them. Be sure to sub if you're not subbed yet, especially if you like Elden Ring content. Then the next week or two, I'm going to be doing some content for Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3 as well, and continuing Elden Ring content. Some early game builds are probably going to be coming up as well. Can't wait for those, and I will catch you guys in the next video.